Hello! In this tutorial I'll teach you how to create a page with a matrix that allows you to classify the skills of your employees. So let's log in our framework, choose one of the workspaces, let's disable these tools to select the default projects, and let's create a new page called matrix. So now that we have the page editor open, with the corresponding selected template, let's drag and drop the matrix widget into one of our template regions. And the focus of this tutorial is to teach you how to configure this widget here, so we can have a list of employees in the axis Y, a list of skills in the axis X, and then in the middle we're gonna have some options so we can create the classification for each skills. Something like bad, good or very good. Very simple. So let's just save this. So currently we have an empty matrix, as you can see here. It's not configured, this is the default view. And what we need to do is to go to our databases and let's create our tables, so then we can configure our matrix widgets according to, or to pull the data for, from that tables. So let's create here a new table called employee. Let's create another table called skills, and let's create another table called employee skill, which we're gonna have the combination of two tables with the classifications. So first of all, in the skills, let's add a new attribute called title. In the employee, let's add a new attribute called name. If we want, we can move this up in here too. In the employee skills, let's drag and drop the employee table inside of the employee skills, the skills inside of the employee skills, so we can have the foreign keys of both tables. In here we need to erase this primary key. So basically what we want to do, we want to set these two foreign keys as primary keys. So to do that, we just click edit of this employee skill table. We can erase these attributes, which are dummy attributes, doesn't really matter. And for the employee underscore ID and the skill underscore ID, what we want to do is to set them as primary key from another table. Okay, and additionally what we want to do, we want to have another attribute here to save the classification. So classification, which in this case will be a small int. Okay, something like this. If we want in here, we could erase all these fields that we don't really matter. These are attributes that the system creates by default, so we could just erase them. In here the same thing if you want to, or we could just leave them. It's exactly the same thing. Okay. So basically now we can see that we have our tables much more clean. The employee has a primary key and the name, the skill has the primary key and the title, and the employee key has the two primary keys from both tables and an attribute classification which receives a small int. So let's go back now to our matrix page. Well, before that, before we go back, we need to add some dummy data to this table. So let's add some employees, some default employees. So let's put here João Pinto, the first one. Let's put here Maria. And let's put here another employee, which should be Anna. Okay, here it is. And for the skills, let's add some default records too, that we can have in here. We can have sysadmin. We can have DBA, and in here we can have programmer and web designer. Okay, something like this. Okay, and now in the employee skills we can add like 3 records too, saying for this employee I have these skills and the classification is 3. For this same employee, the classification is 3 too, and for Maria, she's a good web designer, something like this, whatever. Okay, so basically we just set like some relationships between the employees and the skills, and we give some classification. So what we want to do now is to go back to our matrix page in our page editor, and we want to configure a matrix so we can edit all what we were doing directly here in the database. The idea is to have that in here. So first of all, let's show here the borders so we can see where we are clicking, and what we want to do is to select here the table row, which is in this case, let's just expand this so we can see this better, and we want to select here table row. Okay, and in this table row I want to load a resource which will be the list of skills. So I select the skill table here, get multiple records, so we get all the records from the skill table, and the system automatically is creating all the logic code to pull the records from this table here and show it here. Okay, first step is done. Second, we need to say that, okay, in this column here I want to show, in the display resource attributes, I want to show the title for each record. So I go to the resource that was created and I select the title. Okay, done. Now the next step is I want to select the body row, and I want it to load a new resource which basically we're gonna have the employees list. So I just do update. Automatically the system creates all the logic code to pull the data from the employees table, and in here then I click in the column, and in the column I want it in the display resource attributes, I want it to show the name of the employee. Could do this, or I could just simply go here, select a new resource created and do this. This is exactly the same action. Okay, perfect. So first step is done. What I want to do next is in the matrix widget, so I select the main matrix widget, and in here I want to load a new resource which basically will have will be the combination of both tables. So I do update, and the resource is created. Okay, so let's analyze what the system did automatically, because we need to make some changes. So basically when we load this matrix widget, we want the employee skills to be loaded on page load, which is correct. However, when I select the table row, the add table row, when I select the skills, I don't want any load type, which is correct. And in the body, in this case it is the body, okay, the body table row, I want the load type to be none. Okay, so it is both correct. Okay, what I need to do next is for each of these resources I need to set the primary keys. So in the matrix I need to scroll, so I select the matrix widgets, I need to scroll down through the properties, and in here I have a section saying primary keys. I need to add the primary keys for the employee skill table, which is the employee ID and the skill ID. Okay, then I need to select the table as row, and I need to do the same thing. So select the primary keys for the skills, which in this case it is the skill ID, and the row, the body row, it is the employee ID, since it's showing the list of employees. Okay, so first part is done. So if I save and if I preview, I can see that the system already draws the skills in the axis X and the employees in the axis Y, and then it's showing me all of these in all columns. So let's say that I just want to show this for the records that exist in the database. So I need to select the matrix widgets, and in the properties I need to tell it only show data if exists. So if I save this and if I preview, I can see that it's only showing the items for that 3 records that we created in this table here. So if I go to the manage records and I press Ctrl at the same time that I click in this option here, it will open a new tab with the records inside of this table. So we have these 3 records, which are the 3 records that we are here, that we can see here. So next step, what we're going to do is to replace this with the button group with 3 options, saying bad, good and very good. So to do that, we're going to use the Bootstrap library and we're going to use the button group. So we go here to this link, we scroll down, and what we want to do is to select. The idea is to have something like this. So we just copy this code here, we paste it inside of these widgets. Okay, we can remove now this part here, this string, and in here let's check if we have everything copied correctly. Okay, so we have a radio box which has the label, we have the second radio box which has the second label, and we have the third radio box which has the third label. Okay, perfect. So let's change here so I can have some correct labels. Good, and this will be very good, something like that. Okay, perfect. And I can see that this checkbox it is selected. Well, for now let's leave this as it is. Well, as a matter of fact, let's just put some colors here. We can change some classes. So in here will be success class to be green. In here we can make it maybe yellow, and in here we can make it a class danger. Or we could simply go to the properties here, the CSS properties that we have here below, and put the corresponding colors that we wish. Okay, so if we save, let's see what we currently have, and if we refresh the page, now I can see that I have these other buttons, but it's only showing the buttons in the rows that exist. So I want to show this in all the columns. So I need to go to the widgets, to the matrix widgets, and I need to show it, always show data. And if I refresh, it shows in all columns. Okay, so the next step what we want to do is when I click here or here, I want it to save the corresponding data in the database. However, I can see that when I click in any of these fields, it's only changing this field here. That's because we need to understand the code that we copy from Bootstrap. So in these codes here, what we have here, we have 3 buttons corresponding to this piece of code. This is one button, the first button, this is the second button, and this is the third button. So each of these pieces we have an input radio box, and we have a label, where the label corresponds to this input. How? Because the label has this attribute for correspondence with ID, the ID which is here in this input. And additionally, when I click here, it's disabled the previous button. That's because the name are the same for all of these. The problem is that I'm copying this piece of code here for each individual column, but IDs are the same. So when I click in any of these fields, it's getting the ID of the first one and it's changing only the first one. So what we need to do is we need to change these IDs, we need to change the for, and we need to change the names to be unique for each set, for each group that we have here. So to do that, this means that each of these groups here will be unique. These ones will be unique, this one will be unique, so they don't they don't get conflict between each other. So what we need to do is, first we need to go to the layers, to here, in this case to these buttons, and we need to select the first radio box, and I can see that I have an ID here. So let's change the ID. So what I want to do here inside, what I have access to the primary keys and all the attributes that are loading inside of the employee skills. So what I want to do here is to add the employee ID and the skill ID, so this part can be unique. So how can I do that? So I do that inside of hashes. So I put the primary key inside of hashes, and automatically the system will replace this part with the correspondent ID. And I do the same thing here for the skill ID. And I copy this, so this is the ID. So I need to do the same thing here for the name, and in the label which has, we can just, in this case, we can just collapse these guys here, and we need to scroll this down until here, because to get this attribute here, and in here I want to put this attribute. Okay, so first thing is done. I need to do the same thing for all these other ones. So in here in the label I want to do the same thing, in here the same thing, and in these checkboxes now I want to put here, wait, in here the same, here the same, here the same, and in here the same. Okay, perfect. So now if I save, I should have unique groups. So if I refresh here the page, now that I click goods, or I click here, I can see that it's making the correct selection. However, I see that this has this already selected by default. That's because this button here, it is checked, this radio button is checked by default, so we need to uncheck it. So now if we save this, and if we preview the page again, we can see that we don't have any selection. So now if I select something, it's saving, it's getting the selection only for the correspondent groups without interfering with the other ones, as you can see. Okay, so next step what we want to do is to load in each of these groups the correspondent records that are coming from the database. So how can I do that? So to do that, we need to set this radio box. We need to set the values for each of these radio box. So bad, it will be the value 1. So the goods will be the value 2, and the very good will be the value 3. Okay, and then I need to go to the display resource attributes, and I want it to show here or in this case the classification. So I can just come here and I could choose in here this new record that I created. I want to show the classification. Okay, perfect. Just check something here. Okay, it's loading. Okay, when we did that, he set this piece of code here that he shouldn't have done that. Okay, so let's just erase this. Okay, so we need to do the same thing for the other radio box. So we click here, we go to the display resource attribute. We can see that we don't have any load resources here, so we just go to the display resource attribute, and instead of going through here, because it will set automatically these loads, what I want to do is simply write here classification. Okay, and we do the same thing for this other radio box, and voila. Okay, it's done. So we save. So when we refresh the page now, we can see that we have these 3 records, 3, 3, 2, and it's showing automatically the 3, so very good. This employee is very good in these 2 things, and Maria is good, which is the number 2 in these skills here. Now what we want to do next is, when I click in any of these fields, I want it to save that into the database. So how can I do that? So that's the next phase. So the first phase that we see, it's done. So basically we want to show a matrix with the skills and the employees and the classifications of each employee with the skills. So this part is done. The second part is we want to make this table interactive. So how can we do that? So first of all, we need to set, so in the radio boxes, every time that we change, so we need to set a change event that will trigger a specific resource, that a specific action, in this case an action that will save that new value into the database. So first of all, we need to put this element here inside of a form. So let's drag and drop the form inside of this column here, and let's copy this element inside of the form. Okay, so now we have here the form. So now what we want to do is, in the form, we want, in the resources, we want to set a new update attribute resource for the employee skills table, which will be insert or update a record attribute, which is this one here. And let's update this so we can create automatically the corresponding resource and the logic codes. And then it's done. And then for each of the radio boxes, what I want to do is in each of the radio boxes I want to set a new event on change, which basically it will load. What I want is to update the resource item attribute on change. So basically this event here, what we're gonna do is to trigger the update attribute resource from the form, or that is defined in the form. So basically this, it will trigger the update attribute resource that is defined in the form, which was this resource that we created here. Now there is something that is missing here. So if we just save this, let's see what we currently have now. If I click goods and if I refresh here, I can see that is not doing anything. Let's see it why. So first of all, let's put some message in this update resource attribute so we can know if it is really executing or not, and if it is executing with success or not. So let's put here saved, and here let's put a message saying error. Let's refresh the page, and when I click here, something is not doing anything. So let's see it why. So if I do inspect, and if I go to my network tab in here, when I click something here, is not loading. Now it's loading the resource. Okay, but we are having some error because we are not passing. It's here. Okay, it's not passing the classification. So basically it's telling us that we are having an error saying that the classification cannot be null. That's because when we click in these fields, we need to tell him that he needs to pass the value according, not with the name of the button, but with the name of the attribute that we set to show, which is the classification. So how can we do that? So we need to go back for each of the radio boxes to the properties, and we need to go to the display resource attribute. In here we need to expand the advanced properties, and in here we need to select this option here saying ignore field attribute name. Basically it's explained here that what this we want to do is, instead of using the name of the radio boxes, so the name of the radio box was the name that we created here, these names, which is dummy names, so the bootstrap can use these, but we don't want to send the server with this name because this name doesn't mean anything. We want to send this as the classification. So the way that we do this is, in the display resource attribute, we are saying that the attribute name is the classification. So what we need to say is, use this name and not use the name of the input. So that's what this checkbox is for. So when we select this, now the system, every time that we make some changes, what the system will do is simply send the correspondent value of the correspondent radio box, 1, 2 or 3, will send that value to the server with this name here, with the classification. So if we save this and if we refresh, when I click in some value, I can see that it's sending already the corresponding classification. If I click in the other ones, it's not sending. That's because we forgot to do something. So basically when we were setting the trigger of the event for the radio box, we need to set, we only did that for one. So we need to do this for all the other ones, obviously. So we need to go here, we need to do don't change, exactly the same thing that we did before. So this one and this one, the same thing. Okay, now it's done. Now all of the buttons have the on change event and have we forgot to put in the other ones, we need to select that option too. So it needs to be the same. So in here we need to select the ignore field and in here we need to select ignore field. This one we did it before. Okay, so now it's done. Okay, in all of the radio boxes. So now that if we refresh the page, if I click in here, automatically I can see that it sends a new request with the classification 2. If I click here, it changes, send the classification 3. If I change bad, it sends the new record. So it's working correctly. As you can see, it's sending the correspondence request to the server. If I do refresh here, I can see that I have a bunch of new records. Now I can close my debug tab here, and every time that I click here, I see a message saying that it's saved. If this message here is annoying, what I need to do is simply go to this form and disable it. Go to this correspondence resource that we created and go here and remove the image, the message save, only show if it is error. And that's it. So basically, if I save now, I can see that the system is loading this correctly, and now if I click good or very good, it saves and doesn't give me any message anymore. So if I refresh this, I can see that it's saved correctly. And if I check here, I have the records in here too. So this is just an example how can you create in a very simple way a matrix with the employees and the skills with a bunch of buttons to select the classification or to classify that employee according with specific skills. This can be used for multiple different things. Instead of having this button group, we could have a simply drop down box where we're gonna have these options selected inside of the drop down. That could be another example. So this is just a simple tutorial to show you that you can do with this, you can do multiple different things, including a Scrum board in here. That's for the next tutorials I'm gonna do. I'm gonna teach you how to do that. And that's it. So thank you very much.